I asked the children today, and the Pathfinders maybe as well, did you bring a dinosaur? Dinosaurs. Can I have all the dinosaurs up here? Come on, bring them all up here. Look at this. Hang on. Did you bring a dinosaur, Rennie?
I am a dinosaur. Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, look. Oh, wow. Come on, bring them all up here. Wow, look at that. Look at this. Okay. Now, does anybody know what their dinosaur is? What? A stegosaurus. Look at this. Okay. When I was your age, I couldn't even say stegosaurus. So, and what's this? Do you know what this is your one, yeah? Is this your one? Here? No? This is a sauropod. Brontosaurus, a sauropod. Okay. Alrighty. And this, what's this? Ferocious guy. A T-Rex. Okay. And there's another one behind. Yeah, okay. And this guy with the broken tail, he's another brontosaurus. He's another sauropod. So, okay. All right. Now, we all know all this sort of stuff about dinosaurs today. But how come, do we have dinosaurs walking around today? No. And that's in some ways a sad thing, but maybe not necessarily a sad thing if we mean we're not having a T-Rex turning up this morning at church, okay? So that's why the doors are low, to keep the T-Rexes out. All right. Now, the reason why we know about dinosaurs is because of this. 200 or 300 years ago, people got very interested in digging up bones of stuff, and they kept on digging up bones of things like dinosaurs. So they could assemble these skeletons, right, these fossils, and there's a battle going on for a T-Rex here. Okay, so we could assemble these, they could assemble these, and what the people did, they thought, okay, well, if that's the skeleton, let's put muscles on and skin and bones and make into a dinosaur. And that's how we know about dinosaurs today, okay? But this has only happened in the last couple of 100 years, or 200-300 years. So, when did dinosaurs die out? 65 million years ago. You've been reading your textbook. But I wonder if it's that long ago. Because in Angkor Wat, before they had paleontologists and so forth, before they had people that told them what a dinosaur looks like, and after all, they died out 65 million years ago, right? Okay. So in Angkor Wat, this is a temple, a Buddhist temple, in which now the jungle of Cambodia. 900 years ago it was built. And there's a doorway there. Next to the doorway, there's these carvings of these different things. And you can see on the right, does this have a pointer? Nope. Okay. On the right, on the top, there's monkeys, right? You see there's monkeys? And then there's a man praying, right? And see the next one down, that's actually a water buffalo. Okay, so these are the animals that they have around themselves. And the next one down is what's that? What does that look like? How do they know? What's that? Yeah, okay. So how do they know what a stegosaurus looked like?
They saw me.
Okay, then there's a bishop. A stegi, okay, rightio. So Bishop Bell was a bishop in England. And being a bishop, when he died, he wasn't buried in the churchyard. They cut the floor in the middle of the cathedral and they buried him in the middle of the floor, all right? So there's his grave, that's at the cathedral, there's his grave there. And around the edge of his grave, there's this brass strip. And then around the brass strip, there are all these animals. So you see on the bottom, there's a bat. Then there's a dog, and then there's a bird below that, and then there's a fish on the left, and then there's a pair of sauropods. Well, how did they know what the sauropods look like? And if you looked and you think, well, that's just it's just a pretty rough sketch. If you look right on the left-hand end of the tail of the left-hand one, there's spikes on the tail. And we know that there's a Shawnosaurus was a sauropod with spikes on the end of his tail. So where do they get the ideas from of these?
Maybe because there was an animal that was an ancestor of the dinosaur.
Maybe there was something similar wandering around. Okay. Then there's this, now how do I pronounce this? For you folks who've been in France, Chateau de Chambord. Chateau de Chambord has sometimes given the nickname Salamander Chateau, because now they have got these carvings of these creatures by the hundreds in this chateau. There's more than 200 of these. They're on the walls, they're carved indoors, they're on the ceilings, right? And they say that, what did I say before? I've forgotten. But when you look at them, what do they look like? Don't they look like dinosaurs? And when you look at the detail on the left, on the right is a detail of the one on the left. They've got different types of scales on their backs. So one has got overlapping scale, the top one. The next one down has got scales next to each other. The next one down has got a row of scales running along its spine. These are very detailed. This is not, this is very interesting that there's so much detail of these different creatures that look for all the world like dinosaurs. And this is around 1600. Then there's another chateau, Blois. Now it has a spiral staircase on the outside, a very intricate spiral staircase. And this has a handrail that runs up around that. And the detail of the handrail has these guys, on every second panel of the handrail, has these incredible looking creatures. So where do they get the idea of these from? And then, of course, there's the St. George slaying the dragon legend. Now, this is interesting because the legend of St. George slaying the dragon is from 300 AD around, but it wasn't depicted until 1,000 years later. So what the people did, I want you to sort of get your head around this, what the people did is they had the idea that, okay, we've got to draw St. George slaying a dragon. What does a dragon look like? Well, he looks just like that. And there are hundreds of these depictions in paintings, in sculptures, all over the place. It looks very much like something that we might call a dinosaur today. So this is interesting. Now, now you might sort of say, look, this is fairly anecdotal, and in a sense it is, okay? So for the kids who need to go, I know some kids need to go, that's kind of the end of the children's story. So if you need to go and you need to take your dinosaur, you can take your dinosaur and run. But if you can hang around, then do. But we're in for a bit of a longish sermon today. So I don't mind if you guys sort of at some stage come along and pick up your dinosaur. Okay, yeah, so here we go. You want to take Steggy? Okay. Here you go.
Okay, thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Like to go back to your seats, or you prefer them to sit up the front, Andrew?
Thanks, Pia.
I'm
going to leave this guy here. Now, don't go too far away, Pathfinders, because I'm going to need you in a little while. Okay, so I'm going to ask a question. This is the question. What do you understand by the term scientific? If somebody says, well, that's scientific, what do you understand? Now, I want you to answer me from the floor because we're going to type it up on the screen as you give me the answers. Something has been proved or tested. You can repeat, like as in an experiment, you can repeat it. Okay. What other types of things? It's got to be reliable. Let's use the term reliable. Okay, it's got to be reliable. It can't be just made up, right? Okay. I'd like to suggest it'd be good to have some evidence. Yeah, evidence is pretty important for scientific stuff. Okay, otherwise it's just an idea, right? Measurable. It'd be good if you could be measurable. Okay. So all of these things are things to do with what we call observational science, right? And this is what, when people talk about science, that when somebody says that's scientific, that's like saying that's real, right? That's true, okay? It's got some authenticity about it, okay? So I just want you to watch this video, please, if we can just get this video to run.
In the early 90s, researchers from Montana State University made a startling discovery. Inspecting a piece of T-Rex bone under a microscope, they could hardly believe their eyes. They could see dinosaur red blood cells. This discovery prompted lead scientist Dr. Mary Schweitzer to say, "It was exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone." But of course I couldn't believe it. I said to the lab technician, "The bones after all are 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long?" In a Discover magazine article, Dr. Schweitzer explained further her surprise. If you take a blood sample and stick it on a shelf, you have nothing recognisable in about a week. So why would there be anything left in dinosaurs? Such a response is understandable, considering that she thinks dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. But surely such data suggests it wasn't that long ago.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Right, so this is a famous turning point. Here they found red blood cells in T-Rex bones. Right, now these weren't in a freezer. They weren't from the deep freeze. These were just found. Now what was important about these bones is they weren't fossilised in the sense of being mineralised. Right, normally when we talk about a fossil, this is not always the case, I found out. But normally when we talk about a fossil, it means that a bone, normally it's a bone or whatever's been left over, it could be skin, has been mineralised by the minerals around and turned into something else, right? But the shape of it is still there, okay? So she found, now sometimes you can find fossils of dinosaurs which haven't been fossilised. They might be in the back of a cave, or they may be in some other circumstance where they haven't been fossilised, right? So this really got her thinking, how can this possibly be? She couldn't believe what she was seeing. So she did this experiment where I think they slice it, I think they dissolve in a very weak acid, they dissolve the calcium of the bone away, then they look at what's left over. She did that again to check that it was true. And then she did it again. And she still couldn't believe it. She did it 17 times. This is science. 17 times, same experiment, same result. That's scientific. But what's it saying? How can this be 65 years old? So since then, this started a whole thing because she went out to the museums then, because museums, the larger museums, have got tons, literally, of these fossils, right? They said, look around for stuff that's not been fossilised and see if you can find something if you cut it open. And they found all sorts of different things. And there's another case where a chap found a Triceratops horn just under the ground, and it was actually split, it was open. He managed to get out protein fibre mats, right? So it's quite a incredible sort of thing. So the challenging thing for Mary Schweitzer was deep time. We've got this thing that we've got this really deep time, that these guys are 65 million years old, that the earth is 4.5 million. But in the Bible, we've got a something else. We've got a record of. Here's my Bible. Here's a Bible. So the Bible says that the earth, or let's say the operational earth, let's put it that sense, that creation was 6,000 years ago. You can't reconcile 6,000 with 4.5 billion. Okay, you can't sort of play around with the dates. It's either what they call young Earth or old Earth, right? So deep time is the term that's used for this whole idea of it being very, very old. So is this, now people sort of say, well, hang on a minute. What you're talking about here is faith, right? And what we've got in the deep time, that's science, right? Right, that's science, okay? But all the things we spoke about in science, and we've got a scientist or two around today, all the things that we spoke about in science are things that we can do. We're actually going to do a science experiment later on today in the sermon. Pretty good, huh? Don't do that every day. Okay, so, but when you're looking backwards in time, What's that called? When you're looking for a record of what happened back in time, what is that called? History. That's called history. And in the Bible, there's a written history about the earth, right? And the deep time is actually an alternate history that's put forward. So we don't have faith versus science. We've got one history, one story of history versus another story of history. The thing is, and that this history here is written by people who recorded things when they happened, or they're recording a report from somebody else saying this is what happened, right? So this is actually a written history, okay? The deep time version of history is one where they're talking about the origin of what happened in the earth and things that have happened a long, long time ago. That started 250, 300 years ago. That's when that story started. And it's basically a story which is made up because they didn't like the story that was in the Bible. Now, you'll be surprised to learn that that the whole deep time issue is not something that has any analytical basis. There's nothing there to say this is how old something is. I'm just going to try to, yes. This is one of many books that have been written by this called Rocks Aren't Clocks. It just says it all in the name, right? And rocks aren't clocks. You can't pick up a rock and say it's this old. Now, this is not what the the layperson believes. Hey, of course you can. They've got ways of doing this. Now, I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to sort of open this up for you so you can understand. So how did the idea of deep time originate? So this started in the 1700s. There's philosophers who didn't like what was happening in Christianity. What happened at the end of the 1700s? What's a big thing that happened at the end of the 1700s? French Revolution. And part of that was a reaction against the established church, because the established church hadn't served the common people very well at all. And it was on the nose. This is the seeds of atheism, right? And this is the seeds of what we're talking about in the deep time, okay? So different people came up with different ideas. So one of them was a man called James Hutton. And James Hutton, just before he died in 1795, he published a book where he put forward the idea that when we look at geology, because deep time is centred in geology, in the science of geology. When we look at things in geology, we're looking at things that happen very, very slowly, very, very gradually. And he called his theory gradualism. Okay? It was picked up by a guy called Playfair. He used it some more, and then Charles Lyell put forward a story, and then he called it, he took the same idea and he called it uniformitarianism. So uniformitarianism became a thing, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. Then uniformitarianism, the idea that things happen very, very slowly, was plugged into evolution, because evolution needs a lot of time for it to happen. Well, actually, I've done presentations to say, look, it doesn't matter how much time you've got, it can't happen. And that's pretty well solidly shown now in science. I'm going to say, right from the up front here, that I'm coming from a Christian worldview here, right? And these people are coming from a non-Christian worldview. The other thing that I love the Bible, I love God, I also love science. I've always loved science, okay? And I believe that science reveals God. And great scientists have always understood that, right? The pioneers of science have always understood that. And I love them both. So I'm kind of, if I sound a little bit peeved today, it's because I don't like what deep time has done to the psyche of people on the spiritual level, but also on the science level. And as we go through this, I'll explain that as we go a bit further along. So there's five assumptions that I've picked up in this, and there's different ways you can subdivide this. But one of the first things that they came up with, because this thing happened over a period of time, because back in the 1700s, people believed, well, this is the story of the world. It's in here. It's in this Bible, right? So the beginning, so it's something that happened bit by bit by bit. And one of the things was, hey, don't muck around with our history. We've got history here. You can't muck around with that. So the idea came up of prehistory. Now we just got to, and this is stuck. When we looked at this guy, we could term him what sort of creature? A prehistoric creature, right? Really? Hang on, what's history? History's just looking backwards. And what happened before that thing happened? Well, something else happened in history, and something else happened in history. So what's prehistory? History before history? But what it is they came up with the idea that there's a history before the beginning here. So the beginning of this Bible starts off with, in the beginning God made, right? So they're saying, well, you can have this, but we've got a story before then. But it is, guess what? It's a story. Okay? And it has no, nothing you can measure, nothing you can show. Let me move on. The next thing was uniformitarianism. So uniformitarian, now these are two definitions that I got from, not from Christian sources. These are from Google, okay? This is from Google. All right. You know, you want to know something, go to Google, okay? All right. So uniformitarianism, and I didn't realise how big this theory was, because it's much bigger than I thought. The assumption, it's written here, the assumption that the same natural laws and processes that operate in our present day scientific observations have always operated in the, I was going to say in the planet, but actually in the universe in the past, and apply everywhere in the universe. Well, if that was true, the Big Bang just got a big boot, okay, because it breaks all the rules. There's nothing uniformitarian about the Big Bang, okay. But the more important thing I want to look at today is that the next definition there. It's a bit small, I'll read it for you. In geology, because that's where your deep time comes from, the idea of geology. In geology, uniformitarianism has included the gradualistic concept that the present is the key to the past. So this is the catchphrase. What we see happening today is what has always happened, right? The geological events occur at the same rate now as they've always done. Although modern geologists, now this is interesting, although modern geologists no longer hold to a strict gradualism. Today, Earth's history is considered to have been a slow, gradual process punctuated by occasional natural catastrophic events. So gradualism or uniformitarianism is the sort of the secular way of thinking. Catastrophes is something that is consistent with the Bible, because we talk about the Great Flood, great catastrophe that happened. But we know that catastrophes do happen, but they're kind of little ones, okay? But so in today's world, when we sort of say the present is the key to the past, well, what do we see happening today? So let's talk about floods, all right? So first, one of the things I'd like to say is what was happening in Australia 5 years ago is nothing like what's happening in Australia now, right? We are in the middle of a big bad drought. We had huge fires. Now we've got so much water we don't know what to do with it. We can't get rid of it quick enough. As I speak today, for those who are watching YouTube at some point in the future, this is the middle of October 2022, and as I speak, there are floods in several towns across New South Wales and Victoria, all right? And they'll be happening for weeks because it takes a long time for that water to flow through, okay? Now, has anybody been at a flood site after a flood? Has anybody ever sort of helped to clean out a place that's been flood affected or anything like that? Yeah, okay. So as far as what the river brought, right, into the building or whatever, what did you have to clean out?
Silt, mud, rocks, debris.
Okay. Stuff that floated in, right? Okay. So silt and mud typically, right? The fine stuff. All right, okay. So what we've got in the world, when we look at the world, I just got to give you a little bit of a quick thing about geomorphology, the shape of the planet that we see today, right? There are three types of the rocks are divided into three types of groups. There's sedimentary rocks, so sediment carried on water, right? Sometimes you can have a bit of carrying on with the wind, right? So for like a sand dune being blown by the wind. But generally, sedimentary rocks, we understand have been waterborne, right? Then there's igneous rocks. They're the ones that have been molten at some stage, right? So they're either solidified underground, so they're plutonic rocks, or they've come out of a volcano, they're volcanic rocks, okay? So they're the ones that have been molten at some stage, okay? So there's some of those around, but not that many generally, particularly where we are in Sydney, right? And then there's metamorphic rocks. Metamorphic rocks are usually sedimentary rocks that have been changed by heat or pressure to something else. So limestone, which is a sedimentary rock, lots of lime, calcium carbonate, when it gets metamorphosed, it turns into marble. And we get those beautiful marbles that we have that we can have for our kitchen benches or whatever, okay? So overwhelmingly, when we look around the world, we see sedimentary rocks. And in Sydney, we see lots and lots of sandstone, heaps and heaps of sandstone, right? Okay, Hawkesbury sandstone. Okay, so it's a sedimentary rock. It's been borne by water, right? So in uniformitarianism, the present is the key to the past. How can water carry sand? Sandstone is made from sand. Here we've got a block of sandstone, okay? And if you look closely, it's got little granules of sand on it. And actually, I could probably, this got a bit of a split, I could probably break it in half if I wanted to, but I won't, it'll be messy. Okay, so this weighs about 7 kilograms because I weighed it yesterday. And if I put this in water, is it going to float or sink? It's going to sink, okay? But what about, we've got to undo a knob so you can turn the camera. Okay. Yeah, that one. Okay, so what I need somebody to help me do a science experiment. Who's going to come and do a science experiment with me? Come on. Okay, your name is? Adrian? Great. Okay, so this is from that stone. So if you feel that, you're going to have to get your hands dirty. Feel it's quite gritty, right? Yeah, you just broke it. Okay, that's okay. That's all right. So what I'm going to do is here's some other sand here. And if you feel that, put your fingers in there. That's really fine, isn't it? Yeah. So this is really fine sand. This has got the best chance. So what we're going to try to do is going to try to see what it takes for water to be able to carry sand. All right? Pretty easy experiment, this one. Okay, so we're going to take some water. If you like, and crush that up and throw that in there. Crush it up. And we're going to put some of this in as well. Some of that's even floating. Look at that. Okay. And we're going to pour some of this in as well. All right. So, as you can see, it's all sunk to the bottom. Okay. Now, using this technical implement, I want you to do what you can to get that sand to get in the water. Mix it in the water. Yeah, just mix it around. You don't have to go more than that. So how fast is that water going? Pretty fast, but pretty quickly the sand just drops off. Just doesn't want to stay in that water. It takes a lot of energy for the water to... Think of the times when you've seen sand in water. When have you experienced sand in water? At the beach, right, good, okay. Now, I'm thinking, I can remember when I got dumped by a wave when I was a kid, all right, and you get sand all around you, and you get it inside your cossies, and you've got to go out in the deep water and shake them around to get the sand out of the water, out of your cossies, okay, all right. But pretty soon it sinks down. And then when we get our big offshore lows, right, and we get those big waves coming in, and our beaches wash out, right, but they only wash out and create a sandbar a couple hundred metres out, and then weather changes and comes back in again. So I've got some in this container. So to take my word for it, this is the same sand. See, so sand, there's a bit of the sediment floating around there. Now, shake that around to get that sand floating in the water, or get it in the water. See, that's not coming. Yeah, you've got to really shake it up, okay? And then when you stop, it just drops out. It just drops out straight away. So, all right, so that's the end of the experiment. Thanks very much for your help. So to get, and this is real science, you see. This is what you can repeatable, so I can make this. And as soon as you stop, the sand just drops out. So if we're going to get rock like this, hundreds of metres thick, what does it take to get this sand into such a thing that can become a rock? How much energy is in that water? What would the water have been doing? Okay? Does that sound like the present is the key to the past to you? I don't think we can get sandstone from looking at anything that's happening in the present today. Okay? You really need something extreme on the scale that we need it. It's one thing to happen at the beach, but we're talking about over 100 kilometres. Okay? So I think uniformitarianism has really got its limits. The next thing is the geological column. So what happened was that as they developed this idea about having this time factor, they developed this column, and this column is very intricate. It looks really pretty in lots of colours. And so they've got names to different ages. And right down the right hand, the MA, that's millions of years ago. That's how they've split up the time frames within the geological column. But there's no way, because rocks aren't clocks, there's no way of them to verify any of those times at all. None at all. And what happens is there's no place in the world that you can go and see that whole column in one place, even somewhere like the Grand Canyon where it's got very deep, that there's always gaps. There's always a gap between them, right? And different places, this is not, now the important thing here, they've got the names, they've got the time phases, nothing to do with the rock composition. The rock composition's got nothing, the geological column has got nothing to do with the rock composition. It's all to do with a framework of time which is imposed upon what you're looking at. Okay? And how does this work? And it looks different in different places. Then they added another thing in the geological column. It's called index fossils. So this is all happening in the 1800s. So evolution was coming up with this idea that there's these simple creatures and they become more and more and more complex, okay? And they noted that, well, actually, in some of the older rocks, the creatures appear to be simpler, and some of the newer rocks, they appear to be more complex. So they came up with this idea that we could have an index of, if you found a particular fossil, like a trilobite, then you know that you're in Precambrian rock. This is right down to the oldest rocks, okay? So they developed this whole system of how you can identify, and then, hey, hang on a minute, so what happened here is you had a theory of evolution sort of saying things are really old. You had a theory of uniformitarianism saying the rocks are really old. Then they brought the two assumptions together, they tied them together, and they said, okay, well, when you find a trilobite, you know how old that rock is. And then when I find that rock with a trilobite in it, then I know how old the trilobite is. And there's a circular reasoning here. So basically, one fed on top of the other, two sets of assumptions meeting together to make, what do you put as a mathematician, what's an assumption squared? An assumption. Okay. Now, the problem with index fossils is that fossils are very naughty and they keep on propping up in the wrong layers of rock. Okay, and so they keep jumping out. Now, whenever that happens, the scientists who are looking at this do the right thing. They say, well, okay, well, trilobites didn't just live then. They must have lived when up to here and when down longer and all of this sort of stuff. But when you go through your textbooks and stuff like this, that's all very neat. There's a, did I say I've got a thing here? No, I don't have a pointer. So the top group there is, starts with mammals. It talks about mammals. So before the mammals, you had the dinosaurs and so forth. And everybody knows that dinosaurs and mammals didn't live together because they're two different eras, right? But they have found mammals with dinosaurs they had for breakfast in their stomachs. Okay? They're finding things that are just jumping through these things all the time. And they just keep on changing. So one of the things in this system, that the deep time system, is it's in a constant state of flux, as opposed to this, which is a story which doesn't change. Okay, so after the index fossils, so this is still in the 1800s, came the next big step. This is the big one, radiometric dating. Now, rocks are clocks, okay? Because now we can measure the radiometric dating in the rocks. But there's a few problems with this. Okay, now, so just to explain what radiometric dating is, just really, really quickly, what you have a radioactive material. So what a radioactive material means, a radioactive element, is that it's coming apart. Is that the right way of saying it? It's
excess of energy that's trying to release that energy in the form of particles or high energy radiation.
Thank you, Robin. It's got an excess of energy and it's releasing this energy because Robin is a radiographer. He knows. Okay. So I'm appealing to the brain's trust here. Okay. So it breaks down, it changes from one element to another. So the original element is called the parent element, and then the one it changes into is a daughter. And there's many radioactive elements that are doing this. So for instance, the top one there is uranium-235. It changes to the daughter lead-207. And it takes a set amount of time. Now, what was exciting for them to find was that they could measure how long it takes for that change to happen, and they found that that was a constant. That was something that was quite constant. But it's a very, very long time. So that's what they call a half-life. So if I've got this much uranium, to get to half of that, so half of that to change, it takes to lead 704 million years. So if you don't believe me, look, here's a lump of radium, come back in 704 million years and see if half it's still there, right? Okay, all right. So it's a very, very long time, typically. Not all of them. Some of them are, I saw one the other day, it's got a half-life of 13 seconds or something. But anyway, they're very rare. Generally, they have this very, very long time frame, but it's measurable. We've got accurate enough machines that we can measure this. So they thought, okay, well, we can measure. Now, one thing that is not commonly known is that radioactive dating in rocks only applies to igneous rocks. So not to your sandstone and stuff like that, which has got the fossils in it. It only applies to ones that have been molten, all right? Okay. And essentially what they're saying is that, look, when it's molten, it's not a rock yet. When it solidifies, that becomes a rock. That's zero. That's where it starts from. And there's two assumptions. There's actually more than two, I think. Robin, I won't go into all the science, but there's two big assumptions that they make. And one is that when the rock starts off, from when it's solidified, there is no daughter element. So in the potassium argon is one that's used. So there's no argon around. It's all just the potassium, thing, and there's no argon yet. All right, it's got to break down to become the argon. Okay. The other big assumption that they make is that the rate that this is happening, which is the same as it was 10 years ago and the same as it was 20 years ago, has always been that same rate. Right. Now, two things have happened. So in research in the last 20 or 30 years has shown that when the rock is first formed, that rate of change is much accelerated. It happens much quicker than what is happening today. And the second thing is that it's not uncommon to have the daughter element there as well. So right from day one, they're saying, well, there's some daughter element. And that has led to the problems that we can unmask. So here's an example. So this is a section through the Grand Canyon. And in the Grand Canyon, you see it looks like a really nice cake. I missed breakfast this morning, so I'm getting a bit, everything's starting to look like food. So that really nice layer cake at the top, that's Grand Canyon, okay? And it's sitting on, and in the Grand Canyon, and we'll see a picture later, there is like 1,000 metres, or not 1,000, it might be 1,000 metres, of just these dead, flat layers, but they're sitting on a bed of angled old rock. So there's something happened at one stage where this all happened. Now we believe this is consistent with the flood. right? The old stuff at the bottom, that's the old rock of the earth. And then the flood came along and deposited all these layers, because these layers go for hundreds and hundreds of kilometres. Some of them are dead flat, right? There's no sign of erosion between the layers. So if there's millions of years between the layers, you'd see erosion, you'd see an animal burrow, you'd see some plants. There's nothing. There's just one layer upon another, upon another. A layer cake. Yeah, okay, so what they've found, now they're all sedimentary rocks. They're all sediment. You can't measure those. But down in the base, there is, in the strata, in the angled strata, there is a cardanus basalt. There is a basalt. You can measure a basalt. And in some places in the Grand Canyon, there have been volcanic eruptions. So you've actually got basalt coming out of the top, right? Okay. So in one situation, you've got a basalt that's come out of the top, and the lava flow has flowed down the face of the canyon, as you can see there on the left. Okay. So, which is the newer basalt and which is the older basalt? The newer one's on top. Sharp, that's what I like. Okay, the newer one is on top and the old one is on the bottom. So, when the geologists found that the bottom one, they're using rubium strontium, they measured that at 1,070 million years old. And they said, yeah, that's about right. That's a really old rock. Okay, 1070 million years. The top basalt was measured at 1,340 million years. Huh? Well, the geologists say, well, that's wrong. And that's it. They just say that's wrong. They say, well, hang on a minute. You've got this, they're measured in the same laboratory, that, under strict conditions. How can it be the old one on top and the younger one on the bottom? Well, it's just wrong. Now, when you go to geologists and other people who work with different measuring of rock, what you find is that when they're searching for things, if they've got the budget, they will often send away a sample for their radiometric dating, and they will have it dated using different systems, right? And none of them agree. And they'll be like 340 million years, 1.1, 1.1 million years. Another one will. They're wildly different. So what does the scientist do? He looks at the model that he's got in his head and says, that one's right. And he reports that one in his report and he dumps the other two. This happens all the time. And I'm saying, where's the science here? What is happening to the science here? Okay. Mount St. Helens. Who was around when Mount St. Helens blew? You have to be a bit old to see that, yeah. Now, I remember that happening. It's a pretty dramatic thing. And there's massive amounts of very interesting data about Mount St. Helens, okay? So Mount St. Helens blew in 1980, okay? Now, after it blew, there's these dramatic, I should have had some pictures of this. So it's very dramatic. The whole side of the mountain blew out, right? And there's this big flat area. But over the next 10 years, that flat area in the middle of that grew up into what they call a dome. So basically the lava is pushed up but didn't break the surface. So it pushed up and then solidified, so that's granite, if it's underneath, because it didn't get into the atmosphere, so it's granite. So what they did after 10 years, they took that stone, right, and they sent it off to the laboratory to check. How old is this stone? This is 10-year-old stone. And they took a whole rock sample, they broke up different parts of it, the feldspar, the pyroxene, all these different things. And there's the ages that they got. 300, that's in millions of years. 350,000 years, 340,000 years, 900,000 years, 1.1 million years. This is a 10-year-old rock. Now, obviously it's wrong. But it's wrong by being way too much. Okay? Now, this has been done over and over again in different sites. This is Mount Naharuhoi. Correct me if this is from New Zealand, for those of you from New Zealand might... Huh? Narahoe. Okay. And this is pretty well a live volcano, on and off in New Zealand. Okay? It puts up ash every now and again. And it's erupted several times in the last several decades, right? And they know when it's erupted. And there's a lava flow. So they know when that lava flow was there. So they've checked that. And they've sent it off for dating. And it's a bit hard to read. But on the left is the different dates. There's from 19... 1940s right up to the 1970s, and there's the different ages. And there's 4 of those out of 12 or so. It's noted that it's less than 270,000 years, right? Now, these are decades old, these rocks, and the other ones right up to 3.5 million years, 1 million years, whatever. They're all way, way over the top. Okay, so this is very consistent. You can go to lots of different places around the world, do this. What is consistent is the inconsistency. Okay, so radiometric dating, generally, when it comes to geology sort of stuff, now this is in those parts of radiometric dating, doesn't work. There are other forms of radiometric dating, because radiometric dating just means, and I'm going to talk about carbon-14. So carbon-14 is really interesting. So carbon-14 has a different basis of where it comes from. It comes because of cosmic rays and so forth. So the carbon in the air, carbon dioxide is affected, but there's some carbon-12 is your stable carbon. So carbon-14 is your radioactive carbon. It's everywhere. We're breathing a little bit of carbon-14 all the time. But where we pick up the carbon-14 from is from plants. Plants absorb it, right, because they're taking carbon dioxide. They absorb carbon-14. When you and I, anything that eats plants has that carbon-14 as well. We're talking about minuscule amounts. So if you eat twice as much veggies, don't worry, you're not going to glow in the dark, okay? So it's really, really tiny amounts. But the half-life of carbon-14 is not millions or billions of years. It's 5,720 to 5,760 years. I've read different accounts of that, but it's a few thousand, it's 5,000 something years. So after 5,000 years, there's half as much. After another 5,700 years, there's half as much. So how long can it be until there's nothing left, or effectively nothing left? Because remember, you're starting with a minuscule amount to start with. So depending on who you read about, they talk about 70 to 90,000 years, maybe 100,000 years. It doesn't matter how much you had at the beginning, you've got nothing left. All right? So carbon-14 dating is done on lots of different things. And now, does anybody recognise this building? Sorry? Looks, it maybe have been built to the same plan as Bunurong Power Station. This is White Bay Power Station. So when you're going from the city of Sydney over the Anzac Bridge, and you're going over, you see those 2 stacks? That's what you're looking at, the 2 stacks of White Bay Power Station, okay? White Bay Power Station, thankfully, is not running anymore. It's a coal-fired power station. The coal wasn't brought in by boat. The coal was mined, and it was mined in Birch Grove in Balmain, right next door, really close, okay? And I remember hearing this about when I was a kid, that they mined underneath Sydney Harbour to get the coal for this. Well, it was underneath Sydney Harbour, well and truly. 800 metres down is how far they had to go down to get the coal. It's the deepest, to this day, it's the deepest coal mine in Australia, the deepest down coal mine, because quite frankly in Australia we get open cut coal mine, and that's so easy to get. Why go all the way down? But back then that's what they did. So on top of the coal, there is 800 metres of sandstone. Now, coal can be carbon dated. Now, the important thing about carbon dating, in one sense, is not necessarily to measure how old something is, but to know that if there's some carbon-14 in something, it must be less than 100,000 years old, right? So the coal anywhere in the world can be carbon dated. And interestingly, it dates very similar, no matter where you get the coal from in the world. That's very consistent with what we believe in the Bible, because we believe that coal only comes from the flood, okay? And that flood happened over a period of 1 year. So carbon-14, so you can carbon-14 date this. And the carbon-14 actually has the same issue that other radiometric dating has, in the sense that research now has shown that when it was newer, it radiated out quicker than what it does now that it's older, right? So it's stabilised now, but when it was first formed, it was radiating out quicker. So even the carbon-14 date of 20,000 years or so is actually, it's actually less than that, right? So if if the coal which is under the Sydney Harbour is 50,000 years old or something, how old is the stone above it? Younger. Good answer. Okay, that's all we need to know. That's the principle of superposition in geology. If something's at the bottom and another one's on top, the one on top is newer than the one at the bottom. Pretty, except if it's been turned upside down, which does happen in geology sometimes, but you can normally tell. Okay, so now on the right there, that's a diamond. What's a diamond? What's a diamond made out of? Carbon, pure carbon, pure carbon. Diamonds, often they like to, how can they say? They've dated diamonds by the rocks that are around them. Like you see that rock that's around the diamond there? Okay. So, so typically, if you read in textbooks, you look up how old diamonds are, 1 to 3 billion years old. But you take the diamond, this might be an expensive exercise to do, so don't do it too often, but you grind it down, which is not easy to do, and you carbon-14 date it. It does have carbon-14 in it. And it typically has the same, it doesn't matter which diamond you use, it always has a very similar amount, just like coal. Okay? So, hang on a minute. All right. And these guys down here in the bottom right, which they had a cameo appearance earlier on in one of my slides, these two dinosaur skeletons, they're actually from a coal seam in Belgium, I'm pretty sure it was. And you can, a non-fossilised dinosaur bones, you can carbon-14 date them because they've eaten plants. And they're all very similar, and they've got carbon-14 in them. So they're not 85 million years old. Okay? So there's a whole lot of things which are not adding up here in the deep time scenario. The deep time scenario, coal is at least 30 million years old, but up to 300 million years old. That's what it is in the deep time scenario. But it's always got carbon-14 in it. All right? And the amounts of coal, well, that is indicative of a major catastrophe. To get like a mountain of coal like that, that's been compressed, that was an incredible amount of material because it's all trees. It must have been a massive thing to have that happen. So when we look at the Grand Canyon, are we looking at millions of years? Really? Perhaps not. Is it rock eroded by a river? Because that's what they say around the signboards. If you go to Grand Canyon, you say, look, see down the bottom there? That's the Colorado River. And it's taken millions of years for it to wear down through all of that rock. You see the top is a plateau, dead flat. Right? Okay. So there's an alternative understanding and there's reasons to support this, because I'm going back to this thing where we're looking back in time, but we do have some evidence. I mean, we're looking at evidence here. This is evidence. There's something's happened here, right? This used to be all flat and now it's not. There's a hole there, right? Okay. So what evidence can we put forward to support the alternate view? So in Genesis chapter 7, almost done, so stay away. So in Genesis chapter 7, in the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month, this is a history which is pretty precise. All the springs of the great deep burst forth. So this is what is said in the Bible. Because you ask people about, well, how can it rain for 40 days and 40 nights and cover the world in water? But the rain doesn't come. It didn't just rain for 40 days and 40 nights. On that day, the Bible says, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of heaven were open, and the rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Now, we have biblical geologists, and this is the model that they put forward. There's three phases of the biblical flood. So in the first phase, we basically have the splitting of, there's what they call the supercontinent, which is called Pangaea. So there's horizontal movement, there's the lava from the bottom breaking in, and there's the continents are splitting apart, and land is being lifted or sinking down. And that lava mixing with the water creates so much steam that it's filling the atmosphere full of water and it cannot hold it, so it drops it. So this is what was feeding 40 days and nights of rain, was this a massive amount of evaporation that was happening up into the air. So in the second part of the sequence, the earth is flooded, right? We didn't have, so people think, well, hang on a minute, how can you get so much water that Mount Everest is underwater, right? Now, the Bible says, I think, up to about 20 metres above the highest mountain is how deep the water was. So I said, well, that's an awful lot of water to get out. Well, Mount Everest wasn't there, all right? And if you go to Mount Everest and you look at the rock, guess what rock you get on the top of Mount Everest? Limestone, sedimentary rock, which was under the sea. Proof positive, the top of Mount Everest was under the sea at some stage. Then the third stage is where you have the uplift. The uplift. So you have all this water covering the earth. Now, how do we get dry land? There has to be an uplift, right? And or a downturn. And in Psalm 104, verse 8, the mountains rose and the valleys sank down to the place where you established for them. So there's a movement, right? And we have evidence of that movement. The evidence is in numerous ways. Now, when you have the rise of, say, Australia, coming up out of the water, it's still covered with water, and the water is running off. And it runs off in any direction that it can to get to wherever it's got to. Water finds its level, right? It's got to go into the ocean basins. And so it's running off, and it's just slicing off massive amounts of erosion, okay? Because as well, it's running fast, okay? This is what we need to make sand be carried by water. It needs to run fast. And when it's doing that, it's just planing. It's what they call planation. Anything that's in the way, it just flattens it. It just planes it flat. It's like sandpaper, right? And then as the water, so this is with the water running over the land. Then as the water drops to the point where it's getting close to the level of the land, and there's any sort of dip that happens in the land, the water will go down there. And it's cutting through it. Now, this is the big thing to remember. This whole thing in the sequence has happened in 1 year. So there's all this sediment that's been built up, hundreds of metres of sediment in many places of the world, and it's not rock, it's just a big pile of sand. So when the water runs through it, it's just cutting straight through it. With the sediment it's carrying, it's capable of cutting straight through granite as well. But it can carry away massive amounts of water. And that's why around every continent to this day, you'll get a continental shelf. That's the sediment that's run off all around the continent. And an interesting thing is that in the uniformitarian model, the way that ground is eroded is through the rivers. So you'd expect to see, from where the rivers flow out, you would expect to see these big areas of sediment. But the continental shelves ignore rivers. They just go right around. If you have a look at Australia's one, its smallest side is on this side because we've got the Great Dividing Range. We had little water coming off this side compared to the other side of the country. It's very, very consistent. So we're seeing this evidence which is really consistent with this happening. And this is a picture of, and you can see this down beaches someplace. If you've got a beach where there's a stream running through or something, you get the sea coming up and with the tides inundating during the day or whenever, and then if there's a washout somewhere, you'll get this. And interestingly enough, look at the layers that are in that sediment there. That sediment's probably only a couple of weeks old, and it's just cut through. There's all these layers, lots and lots of layers. So that, enlarged much bigger, is what you see in the Grand Canyon, is what you see in the Jamison Valley, the Gross Valley, you see in many places around the world. Okay? Now, when I say that the rock was soft, okay, that it wasn't rock yet, there are uplifting forces that have happened, when the land is being pushed up. So if you've got a rock, right, and you've got a layer of rock, because it's always laid horizontal, when it gets pushed up and it's rock, what's going to happen to it? It's going to break, right? Think of lasagna, okay? So, like not wet lasagna. It's just going to break. It's just going to crack up, okay? But but there are many places where we can go and we can see rock folded as if it was Play-Doh. Now, in the uniformitarian version, every one of those layers is millions of years old, or some extremely long period of time. Look at this. Look at this. Like Play-Doh. Those layers would have been laid horizontal. All those layers were laid horizontal, then they were pushed, and look at how they've bent and folded, like Play-Doh. That doesn't happen with hard rock. What happens with hard rock when it gets pushed up? This is what happened. Oh, well, no, this is another one. So this is I don't know if you can see the person at the bottom. It's about a 50th the height of the picture. Okay, so these are the forces that happened at the end of the flood. The things are pushed around, and the rock was bent and folded because it was soft, right, and eroded easily. If you've got hard rock, because today we still have mountain ranges that are pushing up. Himalayas are still growing. I was in Tanzania 2011 on a mission trip, and we went into a cave system. This is a cave system in Tanzania, not limestone caves like we find limestone caves around Australia, right? This is from uplift of rock, teutonic, and this is what happens when rock is lifted. It just gets broken up into huge slabs, and voids happen underneath it, right? Massive. These caves were so extensive. The gentleman there that's not in our blue shirt uniform that we had. Blue shirts seem to be popular today. Blue shirt uniform that we had is the local man who's showing us through, because this is of great historical significance to them, because they had tribal wars 100 years earlier, and a whole village lived in these caves and escaped being found by another tribe with all their animals and everything. That's a very extensive cave system, right? That's what happens when rocks are moved. So the point of all this is that there's a poison in deep time, all right? So many people have deep time in their psyche that this is just because you're hearing it all the time, right? Okay? So and there is a thing that happens, particularly with young people, when they're going into university and so forth. There's a large drop-off from going to church. And one of the at least subconscious things that's happening is they're saying, hang on a minute, this is talking about 6,000 years, and everybody knows that the world is 4.5 billion years old. They don't know. There's no empirical proof to show that. And as I've shown, I've just scraped the surface with a few things today to show you that the earth is not old at all. It's quite young. And I believe that this is a piece of history which is worthwhile giving it some reliability and credence. And so, yeah. So just be aware of that poison. It's just in our society around us all the time. And scientifically, it doesn't stand up. Right? So let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for the record that we have in the Bible. And thank you that we've got common sense, that we can look at things, that we can do experiments, that we have science, that we can investigate and try to understand the things of the world around us. With the history, Lord, we know that you were there and that you've given us a record of that. And we thank you for that, Lord, and that can be relied upon. So we thank you, Lord, for being close to us. We thank you, Lord, that you care not only about the world, but you care about every single individual that's here and every single individual in the world. And that the best path that we can follow is a path that you would lead us on. So, Lord, lead us each one. Help us to turn away from the things that would pull us away from you, and to just really grab hold of you with both hands. We pray in your holy name. Amen.